Walking into the situation right now, Eric O'Neill, the former FBI agent who helped bring down a notorious Russian spy, Robert Hanssen. He's here to talk about that story and a lot more. You're going to hear it first on CNN. There's a new wrinkle in the fraud case involving nearly 50 Russian diplomats and their wives. They're accused of running a decade-long scheme to steal $1.5 million from Medicaid, but now it appears there may be a whole lot more to this story. Sources telling CNN some of these alleged thieves are also spies. CNN's justice reporter Evan Perez broke the story for us. All right, Evan, tell us what you've learned.
Well, Wolf, sources tell me that for some time the FBI has been trying to bring spy charges against several of these diplomats. These are diplomats that work out of New York for the Russian consulate there. But in the end, the Justice Department decided that they wanted to bring, there wasn't enough evidence, and they decided to go after them for fraud, defrauding Medicaid, which is even more embarrassing to the Russian government. Now, you might recall the 2010 case that exposed a group of Russian sleeper agents, including one named Anna Chapman. She was the classic good-looking spy who climbed up social circles in Washington and New York and has since become a media star back home in Russia. This case appears a lot less sophisticated. One of the diplomats charged in this case is charged with his wife, allegedly filled out Medicaid forms claiming to make about $3,000 a month, when in fact he was making more than $5,000 a month. His family got about $30,000 in Medicaid benefits. In the meantime, according to prosecutors, they were spending about $50,000 at high-end stores like Prada and Bloomingdale's. Here's what Preet Bharara, the top federal prosecutor in Manhattan, had to say about this.
As the complaint alleges, the scam exploited a weakness in the Medicaid system, and the charges expose shameful and systemic corruption among Russian diplomats in New York.
Evan, how many of these diplomats are still in the United States? What happens to them?
Well, of the 49 that are charged, Wolf, only 11 are still in the United States, and they cannot be arrested. That's because they have diplomatic immunity. Now, the only way the case can move forward is if the Russian government waives their immunity, and that's not likely to happen. The State Department is expected to send them home instead.
What's the Russian government, Evan, saying about all of this?
Well, the Russian government it said that the public announcement of these charges was undiplomatic and that they appear designed to cause problems between the two countries. The Russian deputy foreign minister told local news agencies, quote, "We have a lot of claims to American diplomats in Moscow, but we're not making them public." So, Wolf, sounds like we can expect some more retaliation, perhaps, from the Russians in the coming weeks and months. Wolf?
Wouldn't be surprised. Usually when the U.S. does something like this, they respond tit for tat in Moscow. Right. We'll see what happens. I suspect some U.S. diplomats getting ready to be expelled, presumably, from Russia. But we shall see. Evan, good reporting. Evan Perez reporting for us. Perhaps the most famous espionage case since the Cold War ended was that of Robert Hanssen, an American FBI agent who was busted for spying on behalf of the Russians. Hanssen was brought down by a fellow FBI agent, a young man named Eric O'Neill, who was played by the actor Ryan Phillippe in a movie about the scandal called Breach. Listen to this.
Come to admire him, I see.
Yes.
Respect him?
I never cared about making headlines. I wanted to make history.
He's a traitor, Eric. Started spying for the Russians in 1985. Good news is you're in the middle of the biggest case we've ever run.
Joining us now is the man who actually busted Robert Hanssen, the former FBI agent Eric O'Neill. Eric, thanks very much for coming in.
Great to be here.
All right, so let's talk about this case that Evan was just reporting on. What do you make of this alleged spy ring?
Well, it sounds a little bit like the mobster investigations, where you can't get them for what you want to get them for, but you get them for tax fraud. We've got a group of Russians who are working in the different diplomacy here in D.C. and the consulate in New York. And it seems that you guys broke a good story. The initial investigation may have been for intelligence, for spying, and they found some other information that was able to release a much broader and distressing a number of actions against them.
And if these were all Russian diplomats or their spouses, for example, they would have diplomatic immunity, as Evan points out. And the U.S., unless the Russians agree to waive it, they're going back to Russia. They're not going to jail.
Exactly. And we don't have a treaty with Russia where they would send their people back to be on trial here. So they would literally have to waive it and allow us to do it, and it's very, very rare.
How, based on your information, you're a former FBI agent, you know a lot about this, how, the Cold War is over. So a lot of folks think that spying between the U.S. and Russia should be over as well, but there's still a significant amount of espionage going on, and some are saying maybe it's as significant as it was in the bad old days of the Cold War.
I'd say it's even worse. Espionage is the way the world turns. Espionage is how a country or a society gets an advantage over another. And espionage right now has transformed from Cold War espionage to espionage looking at economic information and information that can make a country stronger. So it's even more of a problem today. For us.
When the U.S. goes ahead and makes all of this public, all this kind of information, what kind of pressure does that in turn put on the Russians to follow suit, if you will, and make up stories or maybe find some real stories about U.S. espionage inside Russia?
Well, if you think about it, there's back and forth. So we had Edward Snowden, and that was a big problem. And Russia, I believe, was if not behind it, at least complicit in it.
Well, wait, let's get a step back. All right, so you say behind it. What do you mean by that?
Well, I've got this theory, and you can call it a conspiracy theory, that the ease with which he left here, the ease with which he has suddenly got an asylum in Russia, may have been aided by the Russian intelligence services.
So that's your suspicion?
That's my suspicion.
Do you have any evidence to back it up?
I don't.
None?
No.
Whatsoever, because he flatly denies anything along those lines.
It walks like a duck, it smells like a duck, and sometimes it's a duck.
Would that be, you would guess that a lot of your former colleagues in the FBI would have a similar suspicion?
I think so.
That there's more to this story than he's alleging right now, he's suggesting.
He sure seemed very sophisticated in how he did it, and suddenly he disappears and he sneaks through China and all sorts of things happen, and he's sitting in an airport lounge and he gets asylum. It's that easy.
How much damage do you think Edward Snowden did to the United States?
Untold damage.
When you say untold, what does that mean?
One of the biggest problems that he did is he created a system where we cannot trust any of those different systems, whether the NSA or other intelligence services we put together. So they'll have to be dismantled and start over.
But some people think he did a service by exposing a really aggressive NSA surveillance, which could filter in on American citizens, not just foreigners.
True. I mean, that's one. I don't subscribe to that. I don't think it's a service, because I think that had he really felt passionate about it, had he really felt like he was making change, he might have actually come back and said, okay, I'll go on trial. Let me have my say, because I'm right. And instead, he ran and hid, and who knows what else he's selling out to the Russians right now.
But that's a serious, suspicion that you have, charge that you have, that the Russian government of Vladimir Putin was actually running him as an agent when he committed these, whatever he did, stealing all this information.
Exactly, a suspicion, but I would not be surprised if that's where it started. They're that good.
How tense would you say the espionage relationship between the U.S. and Russia is right now?
It's extremely tense. We go from the Russian illegals, and when you showed Anna Chapman and her friends and colleagues there, which are illegals. Now, we started with diplomatic immunity. These are Russian intelligence agents who do not have, or spies, who do not have immunity. So they're here illegally under some pretext. That's dangerous for them, because we can arrest them and try them, and that's what we saw in that case. In the current case, we've got 49 or so individuals who are here, many of them with immunity, and we can't try them. Now, they've committed fraud, and it's clear they committed fraud against the United States and against the United States people. That's why so many of them were paroled out quickly. The ones that have immunity, well, they can hang around and finish up what they need to do. And then we'll see them all leave.
What did you think of that film that was based on what you did with Ryan Phillippe?
Right, Breach. That was a great film. It was an inside look at how the FBI actually conducts an investigation without all of the extra gadgets and wizardry that goes into so many Hollywood movies.
And Hansen caused an enormous amount of damage to the United States.
Hansen caused untold damage, and we're literally still trying to figure out.
Who caused more, he at the FBI or Aldrich Ames, another Soviet Russian spy at the CIA?
Well, if you asked Hansen, he would say himself. He had no respect for Aldrich Ames. He constantly would tell me that Aldrich Ames was a bumbling fool. Those were his words. Mm-hmm. And I think he was almost proud at how good of a spy he was. And I truly believe that he did more damage.
Now, without acknowledging at all that Snowden was run by the Russians, who caused more damage, Snowden or Aldrich Ames or Robert Hanssen?
I think at the end of the day, Robert Hanssen, because the secrets that Hanssen stole were targeted to hurt the United States. The damage that Snowden has done, we don't know the full extent of it. Two, one could say there are some politically beneficial aims to it, but at the end of the day, I think that most of what he did was tear apart different goals that we had and different programs and systems we had that now have to be redone.
Eric, thanks very much for coming in. Eric O'Neill, former FBI agent.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Coming up, power flight. Unlike any other, we have details on who's flying aboard Air Force One with President Obama to Nelson Mandela's memorial service. There could be an awkward moment when they all get there. Will President Obama come face to face with Cuba's Raul Castro? They're both on the podium. They're both speaking tomorrow morning. Stand by.